The Last Platoon. Opening Hook. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering your entire military base no longer exists. No satellites, no internet, no GPS, only endless mountains, and thousands of warriors marching toward you. This isn't another training exercise. You've just traveled over 2,000 years into the past. The 3rd Recon Platoon had been conducting a routine NATO field exercise in Eastern Europe. 32 soldiers, 8 armored vehicles, 3 supply trucks, 1 medical unit. Then the sky exploded. No warning, no sound, just a blinding white flash. When the light disappeared, everything had changed. The roads were gone. Power lines, gone. Modern cities, gone. Only forests and smoke rising from distant villages. Their radios produced nothing but static. Satellites couldn't be reached. Drones launched into the air, but every navigation system failed within minutes. The platoon was completely alone. 3 days later, they found people. Farmers wearing animal skins. Speaking a language no translator recognized. At first, everyone assumed they had stumbled into some isolated tribe. Then the scouts returned with terrifying news. Nearly 20,000 warriors were marching toward them. Bronze armor, massive shields, long spears, horse-drawn supply wagons stretching for miles. The local villagers called them the King's Invincible Army. The commander faced an impossible choice: run forever, or stand and fight history itself. The first battle lasted less than 10 minutes. Machine guns ripped through the front ranks before the ancient soldiers even understood what was happening. The deafening roar echoed across the valley. Men dropped their shields and fled. Others froze in terror. Some believed lightning itself had come to life. But victory came at a cost. Thousands of rounds had been fired. Fuel tanks were no longer full. Missiles could never be replaced. Every bullet now mattered. The commander quickly realized something terrifying. They weren't fighting one army. They were fighting an entire civilization. Every victory created more enemies. Every destroyed village meant fewer supplies. Every day their equipment slowly wore out. Without replacement parts, even the strongest tank would eventually become nothing more than a steel monument. So they changed tactics. Instead of conquering, they began teaching. Engineers built water systems. Medics treated diseases that had killed children for centuries. Mechanics showed blacksmiths stronger methods of forging steel. Farmers learned better irrigation. Within months, entire settlements pledged loyalty, not out of fear, but gratitude. Knowledge became more powerful than ammunition. Years passed. The last helicopter never flew again. The final armored vehicle stopped forever. Rifles became priceless relics locked away inside a fortress. The soldiers grew older. Many married. Children were born into a world that knew nothing of electricity, but carried the memories of it. The platoon slowly transformed into something history had never recorded. Not conquerors, not kings, but guardians of a civilization that had taken a different path. Centuries later, archaeologists in the modern world uncovered a stone monument unlike anything ever seen. Carved into ancient rock was a perfectly detailed image of a modern military helmet. Beneath it, in flawless Latin, were the words, "They came from the future and chose to build instead of rule." Maybe history was never changed. Maybe this was history all along. The monument's discovery shocked historians around the world. No one could explain it. The stone had been buried for nearly 2,000 years, packed in cold earth that smelled of damp clay and old roots. Yet the helmet carved into its surface matched a 21st century combat helmet with impossible precision. Every ridge and curve cut so sharply it seemed almost freshly carved. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered something even stranger. Fragments of hardened steel unlike any ancient alloy, dark with age but still catching the sunlight in dull flashes. Tiny pieces of bullet jackets. A rusted dog tag with only 3 letters still visible: J AC. The excavation was immediately sealed off. Governments called it a hoax. Scientists demanded more time. Conspiracy theories spread across the internet. But the truth had disappeared centuries earlier. Back in the past, Captain Mason watched another column of refugees arrive at the fortress. This time, they weren't escaping war. They were escaping famine. An entire harvest had failed after months of drought, and the air around the gates carried the sour smell of dust, sweat, and exhaustion. The platoon's food supplies couldn't feed everyone. For the first time, their greatest enemy wasn't an army. It was hunger. Using memories from modern farming manuals, the engineers designed canals and simple irrigation systems. Local craftsmen copied every design. Within weeks, dry fields began turning green under the hard sun, and the first shoots pushed through cracked soil. The villages celebrated what they believed was another miracle. Captain Mason knew it wasn't a miracle. It was knowledge. But every improvement attracted attention. Messengers carried stories across kingdoms. Some called the fortress a city of gods. Others claimed demons lived behind its walls. Eventually, those stories reached the emperor himself. He sent diplomats first, then spies, finally, an army. Not 20,000 this time. Nearly 100,000 soldiers, the largest force anyone alive had ever seen. Captain Mason climbed the fortress wall and watched thousands of campfires appear across the valley, one by one, until the darkness shimmered with orange light and the smell of wood smoke drifted up on the wind. His ammunition report was lying open on the table behind him. Less than 15% remained. No reinforcements, no resupply, no escape. Only one question remained. Could 32 soldiers survive one last battle against an empire? Dawn broke beneath a sky stained deep red by smoke from thousands of campfires. Captain Mason studied the endless ranks stretching across the valley. Spearmen, archers, heavy infantry, cavalry. The Empire had come to erase the mysterious fortress from history. Inside the walls, every soldier knew the numbers. Each rifle magazine was counted. Every grenade had a name beside it. Even diesel fuel was rationed by the hour. There would be no second chance. As the sun climbed higher, a group of riders carrying white banners approached the gate. An old general stepped forward and demanded the fortress surrender before sunset. Captain Mason listened without interrupting. Then he simply pointed toward the valley. "We don't want your empire." The translator repeated the words. The old general smiled. "You already have its attention." By noon, the horns echoed across the mountains. The attack had begun. Thousands of shields advanced like a moving wall. Arrows darkened the sky. The first machine gun opened fire. The ancient formation collapsed within seconds. Still, they kept coming. Wave after wave. Hour after hour. By evening, the battlefield was covered with broken shields and abandoned weapons. But inside the fortress, the situation was just as grim. The final crate of rifle ammunition was opened. Only a handful of grenades remained. One armored vehicle could no longer move after its engine failed. For the first time since arriving in the past, silence filled the command room. Captain Mason looked at the map. Winning another battle no longer mattered. Surviving the next week seemed impossible. Then a lookout shouted from the northern tower. Dust clouds were rising beyond the hills. At first, everyone believed another Imperial army had arrived. But as the shapes grew closer, they saw different banners. Villagers, farmers, blacksmiths, hunters. Thousands of ordinary people marched toward the fortress carrying tools instead of swords. They had come to defend the soldiers who had saved their families. The Empire had expected to fight 32 strangers. Instead, it was about to face an entire nation they had unknowingly created. The Emperor's army surrounded the fortress before sunrise. From the highest tower, Captain Mason could see campfires stretching to the horizon. There were too many to count. His platoon gathered inside the command room. The numbers were brutal. 9 magazines per rifle, 3 machine gun belts, 8 grenades, 1 working armored vehicle, enough fuel for less than 2 days. No one spoke. Everyone already knew. This would be their last stand. At noon, a Roman messenger rode toward the gate under a white flag. He carried a single message from the emperor. "Surrender your weapons and your knowledge, and your lives will be spared." Captain Mason smiled. Then he answered with only 4 words. "We choose our own fate." Minutes later, war horns echoed across the valley. Thousands of soldiers charged the walls. The machine guns roared. The first wave disappeared in seconds. The second wave climbed over the fallen. The third kept advancing without slowing. For 6 hours the battle never stopped. Smoke covered the battlefield. The air smelled of burning wood, blood, and gunpowder. When the sun began to set, the firing suddenly stopped. Not because the enemy had retreated, because the platoon had almost no ammunition left. Captain Mason looked around the fortress. Every soldier understood what came next. Tomorrow. They would have to fight without the technology that had kept them alive. Tomorrow. History would test the courage of 32 ordinary people against the greatest empire on Earth. The next morning, no gunfire echoed from the fortress. There were almost no bullets left. Captain Mason gathered the platoon in the courtyard. Every modern weapon that still worked was locked away. The remaining ammunition would be saved for one final emergency. From this moment on, they would fight differently. Engineers melted damaged vehicle parts into new tools. Blacksmiths copied every technique they could learn. The soldiers trained villagers to build stronger walls, deeper trenches, and better defenses. Weeks passed. The emperor expected fear. Instead, the fortress became stronger every day. Then something unexpected happened. Roman scouts began disappearing. Not because they were killed, because they refused to return. Some had entered the fortress as spies. They left as believers. They had seen clean water flowing through stone channels, fields producing more food than any Roman farm, doctors saving wounded children with skills that looked like magic. Word spread across the empire. The mysterious fortress was not ruled by monsters. It was ruled by people who shared knowledge instead of demanding obedience. The emperor was furious. He ordered one final assault. Every available legion was summoned. Nearly 150,000 soldiers marched toward the valley. Captain Mason climbed the western wall as the first banners appeared on the horizon. He knew they could never defeat an army that size by force. But perhaps they no longer needed to. The greatest weapon they had ever brought from the future was never their rifles. It was the idea that people could build a better world together, and that idea was already spreading faster than any army could stop it. The emperor arrived with his army 3 days later. More than 150,000 soldiers filled the valley. Their banners covered the hills like a sea of red. Captain Mason expected the attack to begin at sunrise. Instead, the emperor requested a meeting. For the first time, the ruler of the greatest empire in the world stood face to face with 32 soldiers from the future. The emperor looked around the fortress. He saw clean streets, healthy children, workshops filled with new inventions, fields stretching farther than any Roman engineer thought possible. Finally, he asked one question. "Who are you?" Captain Mason answered quietly. "We are men who lost our way." The emperor frowned. "You defeated my armies. We never wanted your empire. You changed my world. We only showed people what they could become." For several minutes, neither man spoke. The valley was completely silent. Then the emperor did something no one expected. He removed his sword and placed it on the ground. "If what you teach is stronger than my legions, then perhaps Rome has already lost." Captain Mason slowly picked up the sword. He did not keep it. He handed it back. Rome doesn't have to lose. It can become something greater. Years later, the empire was no longer remembered only for conquest. It became known for its roads, schools, medicine, engineering, and peace. The names of the 32 soldiers slowly disappeared from history, but their ideas never did. Sometimes. The greatest victory is not winning a war. It's giving the future a chance to exist. 40 years passed. Captain Mason was now an old man. Most of the original platoon had gray hair. Some had already been buried beneath the stone walls they had built with their own hands. The rifles were silent forever. The last bullet had been fired decades earlier. The armored vehicles rested where they had broken down, covered by vines and wild flowers. Children climbed over them without knowing what they once were. To them, they were simply ancient machines left behind by the founders. The empire had changed beyond recognition. Cities were cleaner. Roads stretched farther than ever before. Hospitals stood beside temples. Schools taught engineering, mathematics, and medicine alongside history. Wars became fewer with each passing generation. One evening, Captain Mason climbed the highest tower for the final time. The sunset painted the valley in gold. He smiled as he watched thousands of people living peaceful lives below. This was never the mission, but somehow it had become their greatest success. That night, Captain Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep. The next morning, every bell across the empire rang at the same moment. His grave carried no military rank, no medals, only a single inscription carved into white stone. He came from another time and gave us a better one. Nearly 2,000 years later, archaeologists uncovered that grave. The inscription matched no known historical record, but beside the stone lay something impossible. A perfectly preserved stainless steel wristwatch. Its hands had stopped forever, frozen at exactly 8:17. The discovery of the wristwatch stunned the scientific world. Experts examined every gear, every spring, every tiny scratch. The metal showed almost no corrosion despite lying underground for nearly 2,000 years. Some claimed it had been planted. Others insisted it proved time travel was real. No one could explain the inscription engraved inside the case. It read, "If you find this, we made it." The message spread across the world within hours. Historians searched ancient records once again. This time they noticed details everyone had ignored. Maps showing roads centuries ahead of their time. Medical texts describing treatments unknown in the ancient world. Engineering drawings that should not have existed. Piece by piece. The impossible story began to fit together. Back in the past, long before Captain Mason's death, he had left one final order for his platoon. Never tell anyone where we came from. If history remembers us as heroes, it will miss the lesson. They should believe ordinary people changed the world. His soldiers kept that promise. They buried their equipment, destroyed their remaining technology, and erased nearly every trace of their existence. Only one object was left behind on purpose. Captain Mason's watch. Not as proof, but as a question. A reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to inspire the next generation to keep searching. The wristwatch became the most studied artifact in human history. For 10 years, scientists searched for an explanation. Every test reached the same conclusion. It had been manufactured using technology from the 21st century. Yet it had remained underground since the age of the Roman Empire. Then another discovery changed everything. Deep beneath the ruins of the old fortress, archaeologists uncovered a sealed stone chamber. The entrance had never been opened. Inside stood 32 stone statues. Each one faced the center of the room. Each one held the shield of a different soldier. At the center rested a massive stone table. On it lay a bronze box sealed with black wax. The inscription read, "Open only when mankind is ready to value wisdom above power." The box was carefully opened. Inside was no weapon, no treasure, no advanced technology, only a single handwritten journal. The first page read, "If you are reading this, then humanity survived long enough to ask the right questions." The room fell silent. Every archaeologist understood they were holding the final words of people who had vanished from history. Outside, cameras from around the world waited for answers. Inside, the first chapter of the journal was finally opened, and with it, the forgotten story of the last platoon was about to be told by the soldiers themselves. The world watched as the first page of the journal was revealed. Millions expected instructions for impossible technology. Others hoped to find the secret of time travel. Instead, the opening sentence surprised everyone. "If you came here looking for power, close this book." Silence filled the chamber. The journal was not a manual. It was a warning. Captain Mason described how easily advanced knowledge could become a weapon. He wrote about battles they wished had never happened, friends they had buried, choices that haunted them for the rest of their lives. "We did not save this world with our rifles. We saved it the day we stopped using them." As more pages were translated, another mystery appeared. The final chapter was missing. Someone had carefully removed it centuries earlier. At the end of the last remaining page, a short message had been written in different handwriting. The final chapter is hidden where the first sunrise touches the fortress of the founders. Within days, historians, explorers, and governments launched the largest archaeological search in history. Every mountain surrounding the ancient fortress was examined. Every cave was mapped. Every stone was inspected. For months, nothing. Then, on the first morning of spring, a young archaeologist noticed a narrow beam of sunlight passing through a crack in the cliffs. The light struck a single stone that had remained untouched for 2,000 years. Slowly, the stone began to move. As the stone slid aside, a hidden staircase emerged from the darkness. No one spoke. Flashlights illuminated walls covered with ancient carvings. The deeper the team descended, the quieter everything became. At the bottom waited a small circular chamber. Unlike the fortress above, this room had never been touched by time. In the center stood a plain wooden chest. No gold, no jewels, no advanced machines, only a note resting on top. It read, "If you are here, then humanity chose curiosity over conquest." The archaeologists carefully opened the chest. Inside were 32 sealed letters. Each carried the name of one soldier. The final envelope had no name. Instead, it simply said, "To whoever finds this." The lead archaeologist opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single page. "We were never heroes. We were ordinary people placed in an impossible moment. If our story taught you anything, remember this: civilizations are not remembered for the wars they win. They are remembered for the lives they improve." Below the message rested one final object: a modern military patch. Its colors had faded with time, but one line of text was still perfectly clear: "The last platoon." No records of such a unit existed anywhere in modern military archives. It was as if they had erased themselves, so the future could remember the lesson instead of the soldiers. The discovery changed history forever. Schools replaced old textbooks. Universities created new fields of research. For the first time, historians accepted that one unanswered question could rewrite everything they believed. Yet one mystery remained. If the soldiers had traveled into the past, who had sent them? Engineers examined every piece of recovered equipment. Physicists studied the strange radiation trapped inside the ancient metal. Years passed without answers. Then a graduate student noticed something no one else had seen. The radiation pattern matched a phenomenon recorded by satellites only once. On the exact day the platoon had disappeared, the same burst of energy appeared again. this time above the same valley. Within hours, government sealed off the area. Scientists built hundreds of sensors around the ancient fortress. Thousands of people watched the sky. At precisely 8:17 in the evening, the air began to shimmer. Birds fell silent. Compasses started spinning. A brilliant white light slowly formed above the valley. Everyone remembered the final page of Captain Mason's journal. We never discovered why we came here. Perhaps we were never the first. As the light grew brighter, a modern military convoy suddenly emerged from its center. Fresh paint, running engines. Soldiers looking around in complete confusion. History was beginning again. The valley fell completely silent. The newly arrived soldiers stared at the crowd surrounding them. Scientists, reporters, military officers, thousands of civilians. None of it made sense. Their commander stepped out of the lead vehicle. The 3rd Recon Platoon. We were conducting a training exercise. What year is this? No one answered immediately. An elderly historian slowly walked forward. His hands trembled as he held Captain Mason's journal. You've been gone. For 2,000 years. The soldiers laughed. It had to be a joke. Only minutes earlier they had been driving through a forest. Now strangers claimed they had crossed 20 centuries. The commander noticed the ancient fortress on the hill. Something about it felt strangely familiar. Then he saw the stone monument, the helmet, the inscription. His face turned pale. It was identical to the drawing Captain Mason had once sketched in his notebook before the mission. A notebook no one else should have seen. The historian carefully handed him the journal. The commander opened the first page. His own handwriting stared back at him. The ink was faded. The paper was ancient, but the words were unmistakable. If you are reading this, then we survived. The commander looked toward the fortress. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, he whispered the only words that made sense. We've already been here. And at that moment, everyone realized the story had never been about changing history. It had always been about completing it. No one knew what to do next. The soldiers had just met the future. The future had just met its past. Military commanders argued that the platoon should never enter the time portal again. Scientists warned that stopping them could erase everything humanity had become. Captain Mason's journal offered only one final instruction. Do not break the circle. The commander stood in silence, staring at the glowing portal. He finally understood the truth. Every road, every school, every hospital, every discovery inspired by the last platoon existed only because they had chosen to step through that light. If they refused now, none of it would ever happen. One by one, the soldiers climbed back into their vehicles. No one was ordered. No one was forced. Each of them made the same choice. As the engines started, thousands of people gathered along the valley road. Some saluted. Others simply watched with tears in their eyes. The convoy slowly rolled toward the portal. Just before entering, the commander looked back one last time. He smiled. Take good care of the future. The white light swallowed the vehicles. Seconds later, the portal vanished. The valley became silent once again. Only the wind remained, and somewhere, 2,000 years in the past, a bright flash lit the sky. The story of the last platoon had just begun. The white light faded. The engines stopped. The convoy stood in complete silence. Captain Mason stepped out and looked around. The valley was empty. No roads, no buildings, only untouched wilderness stretching to the horizon. A young lieutenant walked over. Sir, the portal is gone. Mason nodded. I know. There would be no way home. The platoon immediately began setting up a defensive camp. Drones were launched into the sky. They revealed smoke rising from distant settlements, small villages, ancient roads, and, far to the south, a massive city unlike anything they had ever seen. Within hours, local shepherds spotted the strange machines. They fled in terror. By nightfall, rumors spread across the countryside. Some spoke of iron beasts that breathed smoke. Others claimed warriors wearing black armor had fallen from the heavens. Those rumors traveled faster than the convoy ever could. 3 days later, a Roman scouting party appeared on the hills. They did not attack. They simply watched. Captain Mason lowered his binoculars. "They've found us." Far away, in the marble halls of Rome, a messenger knelt before the emperor. He struggled to find the right words. Finally, he whispered, "My emperor, men have arrived, riding thunder." The emperor slowly rose from his throne. "Then bring them to me." Neither side realized it yet, but the first meeting between the Roman Empire and the last platoon was only days away. The Roman delegation arrived at sunrise. 20 cavalrymen, unarmed, a single white banner fluttered above them. Captain Mason ordered his soldiers to lower their weapons. The visitors stopped several yards from the gate. An elderly Roman stepped forward. His robes were simple, but everyone around him treated him with great respect. Through signs and a few shared words, he introduced himself as the emperor's advisor. He had come with one question. "Are you gods or men?" Captain Mason looked at his platoon. Dirty uniforms, exhausted faces. Vehicles already beginning to wear down. He smiled. "We're just men." The translator struggled to understand, but the meaning became clear. The old advisor nodded slowly. "Then why do you possess the power of the gods?" Captain Mason pointed toward the fortress walls. "We don't bring magic. We bring knowledge." The advisor spent the entire day walking through the camp. He watched medics treat injuries. He saw engineers purify water. He observed mechanics repairing broken machines with limited tools. Before leaving, he turned to Mason. The emperor expected warriors. What he found were teachers. As the Roman delegation disappeared beyond the hills, Mason felt a rare sense of hope. Perhaps there would be no war. Perhaps history could change without bloodshed. But that night, another messenger arrived from Rome. His horse collapsed from exhaustion. He carried a sealed order from the emperor. The message contained only one sentence. "If they will not kneel, Rome will make them." The emperor's ultimatum expired at dawn. From the fortress walls, Captain Mason watched the Roman legions assemble. Thousands of shields locked together. Standards rose above the ranks. Trumpets echoed across the valley. Yet no attack came. Instead, a single rider approached the gate. It was the old advisor. His face was heavy with regret. "I begged the emperor to choose peace. He believes your knowledge is too dangerous." Captain Mason nodded. "I understand." The advisor reached into his robe and placed a rolled map on the table. Hidden mountain passes, Roman supply routes, the locations of every legion surrounding the fortress. "You are giving us your empire's secrets," Mason said. The old man looked toward the Roman camp. "No. I am trying to save my people." Before sunset, the first Roman assault began. The defenders did not answer with bullets. They opened the gates. Doctors rushed onto the battlefield to treat wounded soldiers from both sides. Romans and villagers alike watched in disbelief. No army had ever done such a thing. The fighting stopped. Even the legionaries lowered their weapons. News of the strange event spread through the Roman camp before nightfall. Many soldiers began asking the same question. If these people are our enemies, why are they saving our lives? For the first time since the last platoon arrived in the ancient world, the greatest threat to the emperor was no longer the fortress. It was doubt growing inside his own army.